Welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of cognitive biases. These mental shortcuts can lead to errors in judgment and decision-making. They influence our choices every day, often without us realizing it. We'll explore how they work, why they exist, and how they affect our lives, so buckle up and let's embark on this journey to understand our minds. Chapter 1. The Anchoring Bias. Ever wondered why the first price you see sticks in your head? That's the anchoring bias at work. The first price acts as an anchor, influencing your perception of value. Chapter 2. The Availability Heuristic. We overestimate the importance of easily recalled information like vivid memories or recent events. If it's readily available in our minds, it must be important, right? Not necessarily. The vividness of the news story makes it more available, inflating your perception of the risk. Chapter 3. The Bandwagon Effect. Are you more likely to try a new restaurant if it has a line out the door? You might be falling prey to the bandwagon effect. This bias suggests we're more likely to adopt a belief or behavior if it's already popular. It's the everyone else is doing it mentality. Chapter 4. The Confirmation Bias. This bias makes us seek and remember information that confirms our beliefs, ignoring contradictory evidence. Your brain filters information to support your viewpoint. Title: The Dunning-Kruger Effect. It states that people with low ability tend to overestimate their skills. Highly skilled individuals sometimes underestimate their abilities, assuming everyone else is just as knowledgeable. Title: The Endowment Effect. We place higher value on things because we own them. It's not about the shirt's worth, it's about the perceived value through ownership. The way we frame information can influence decisions even if the options are the same. This is the framing effect. Positive framing sounds more appealing. The halo effect. First impressions matter. If someone is attractive, we might perceive them as more intelligent, trustworthy, and competent, even without evidence. The hindsight bias. It's the tendency to see events as more predictable after they've happened. After a game, it's easy to say the winning team was obviously superior, but beforehand, the outcome was uncertain. Chapter 10. The Just World Hypothesis. It's the idea that the world is fair and people get what they deserve. This bias can lead to victim blaming and lack of empathy for those struggling. Chapter 11. The Negativity Bias. We tend to give more weight to negative experiences than positive ones. A single criticism can stick with us much longer than a dozen compliments. The optimism bias. This bias makes us believe we're less likely to face negative events than others. While optimism can be beneficial, it can also lead to risky behavior and poor planning. The overconfidence effect is a close cousin of the Dunning-Kruger effect. We often think we're better drivers, better cooks, or better at predicting the future than we really are. The placebo effect shows the power of our minds. Beliefs about treatment can influence its effectiveness. Remember that long list of groceries you tried to memorize? You probably recall the last few items better than the middle ones. We tend to remember recent information better than earlier information, especially in long lists or sequences. The self-serving bias is about protecting our egos and maintaining a positive self-image. Ever finished a book you hated just because you were halfway through? That's the sunk cost fallacy. Sometimes the best decision is to cut your losses and move on. Survivorship bias reminds us we often hear success stories, not failures. We hear about successful entrepreneurs and assume starting a business is easy, but we don't see all the businesses that failed. Chapter 19. The Texas Sharpshooter Fallacy. Imagine a sharpshooter firing at a barn, then drawing a target around the bullet holes. It's used to cherry-pick data to support a conclusion. The third-person effect. It's the belief that others are more affected by media messages than we are. We often underestimate their impact on us. The actor-observer bias. We attribute our actions to external causes, like the situation or other people, and others' actions to internal causes, like their personality. It's why we excuse our own bad behavior, but judge others harshly for the same actions. The availability cascade is how ideas spread and gain momentum. The more we hear something repeated, the more likely we are to believe it, regardless of its validity. When faced with contrary evidence, people often strengthen their beliefs, even if those beliefs are incorrect. The base rate fallacy trips us up when we ignore statistical information, the base rate, and instead focus on specific details. We prefer our beliefs to make sense. The belief bias shows that if we agree with the conclusion, we accept the argument even if it's flawed. The clustering illusion is our brain's way of finding patterns, even when none exist. Flipping a coin and getting 5 heads in a row might seem significant, but it's just random. The conjunction fallacy plays on our intuition about probability. We might think it's more likely for someone to be a bank teller and active in the feminist movement than just a bank teller, even though the latter category is broader and more probable. The decoy effect is a clever marketing tactic that takes advantage of our decision-making processes. The decoy makes one of the original options seem much more appealing by comparison. The empathy gap highlights the disconnect between our current state of mind and our ability to understand or predict how we will feel in a different state of mind later. The gambler's fallacy is a dangerous bias. Just because a coin lands on heads 10 times doesn't mean it's more likely to land on tails next. Similar to the gambler's fallacy, the hot hand fallacy applies to streaks of success. This bias often leads us to overestimate the likelihood of continued good fortune. The illusion of control is a comforting but often misleading belief. It's why we might have lucky rituals or think we can influence the outcome of random events. The illusory correlation is about making connections where none exist. For example, we might think a certain food gives us bad luck, even though there's no logical link. The in-group bias shapes our interactions, often leading to prejudice, discrimination, and conflict between groups. The justification of effort explains why we value things more when we've put effort into them. This bias can make us stick with things that no longer serve us. The mere exposure effect suggests that familiarity breeds fondness. This applies to songs, faces, and brands. The normalcy bias is a coping mechanism that can be both helpful and harmful. People delay evacuation during emergencies, assuming things will be fine because they usually are. The ostrich effect is when we bury our heads in the sand. We might avoid checking our bank accounts or ignore medical symptoms we'd rather not deal with. The outcome bias reminds us that hindsight is 20/20. A decision leading to a positive outcome might be praised, even if it was based on flawed reasoning or poor judgment. The planning fallacy is common, especially for students. We often think we can do more in a day than possible. It's the tendency to be overly optimistic about an invention's benefits, often ignoring its limitations and downsides. The pseudo-certainty effect shows our aversion to risk, even when it doesn't make sense statistically. We prefer a guaranteed small gain over a gamble with a larger but uncertain reward. Ever told not to do something only to want it more? That's reactance. It's pronounced in adolescence but affects all ages. The restraint bias reminds us we're not always as strong-willed as we think. We might vow to resist dessert, but when faced with its deliciousness, our willpower might crumble. Risk compensation is a fascinating illustration of how our perceptions of safety can influence our behavior. When we feel safer, we might take more risks, and vice versa. The salience bias draws us to what stands out, leading to snap judgments and stereotypes. The social comparison bias is a double-edged sword. Upward comparisons can motivate us, but they can also lead to envy and insecurity. Downward comparisons boost self-esteem, but they can prevent us from reaching our full potential. Change can be scary, and the status quo bias reflects our preference for things to stay the same. This bias can prevent us from embracing new opportunities. Stereotyping simplifies our world, but it comes at a cost. Stereotypes lead to prejudice, discrimination, and social injustice. The zero-risk bias highlights our desire for certainty. We'd rather eliminate one small risk than reduce a larger one, even if the latter saves more lives overall. Thanks for watching. Today we explored 50 cognitive biases shaping our thoughts and behaviors. These mental shortcuts influence our decisions daily. If you found this video helpful, like, share, and subscribe for more. See you